Ever wondered how one country ended up with flamenco, cathedrals, bullfights, and Moorish palaces all in one place? That's Spain. From ancient tribes to foreign empires, religious clashes to royal dramas, Spain has seen it all. And the result? A country full of charm, contradictions, and stories that still stand today. But before you admire its beauty, you have to understand what it's been through. Long before anyone called it Spain, the Iberian Peninsula was just a stretch of land where early humans tried to survive. No kings. No borders. Just caves, wild terrain, and people learning how to live off the land. These early settlers were hunters, gatherers, and slowly, they became something more. We see pieces of their lives on cave walls, especially in Altamira, where prehistoric paintings still sit untouched, as if someone left a message for us thousands of years ago. These images aren't just doodles, they're the first voices, the earliest signs of culture, trying to say, we were here. Over time, these early people weren't alone. The land saw more faces. The Iberians and the Celts began to show up. No one called them that back then, but that's how we know them now. Some say the Celts came down from Europe, others think they mixed with locals over time. What matters is that these groups started blending, cultures crossing paths, forming new ways of living, speaking, and building. The early Iberian Peninsula wasn't one unified place. It was a mix of scattered tribes and villages, each with its own way of doing things, but all laying the foundation for what would come. Then the world came knocking. People from far-off lands saw the Iberian Peninsula not just as territory, but as opportunity. The Phoenicians were the first major outsiders to arrive, around 1100 BCE. Skilled sailors from the eastern Mediterranean, they didn't come to conquer, they came to trade. They set up ports along the southern coast, places like Gator, modern-day Cadiz, which still exists today. With them came goods, ideas, and gods no one in Iberia had seen before. Gold, silver, salted fish, it all flowed in and out of those early markets. They didn't take over the land, but they changed it. Next came the Greeks, around the 8th century BCE. They didn't settle as heavily, but their influence still touched the coastlines. They brought new art, architecture, and ways of thinking. Like the Phoenicians, they were drawn by trade, and their colonies dotted the eastern edge of the peninsula. And again, Iberia shifted just a little more. But it was the Carthaginians who came with bigger plans. Carthage was once a Phoenician colony itself, based in North Africa. By the 6th century BCE, it had grown powerful, and it saw Iberia as a source of wealth and soldiers. They weren't here just to trade, they wanted to expand. Carthage built strongholds, extracted resources, and formed alliances with local tribes. Hamilcar Barca, yes, the father of the famous Hannibal, led campaigns through Iberia, carving out a base that would later challenge Rome itself. And that's where the storm began. Rome had been watching. Carthage's rising strength in Iberia made the Roman Republic nervous. It wasn't just about land, it was about control of the western Mediterranean. The tension boiled over in the Punic Wars, especially the Second Punic War, when Hannibal marched from Iberia to Italy, famously crossing the Alps with his elephants. But long before that legendary march, Iberia was already a battleground. Rome moved in. What followed wasn't quick, and it wasn't easy. The conquest of Iberia took nearly 2 centuries. The local tribes, especially the Celtiberians, didn't roll over. They fought hard, city by city, valley by valley. The wars were brutal, and resistance flared constantly. Still, Rome was patient. And relentless. By the end, Rome had won. Iberia became Hispania. But Rome didn't just take the land, it remade it. They built roads that still exist today. They brought aqueducts, forums, and amphitheaters. They introduced Roman law, Latin language, and Roman religion. Over time, Iberians didn't just live under Rome, they started living like Romans. Local leaders took Roman names. Roman customs blended with local ones. A new identity was forming. Roman rule brought stability, but it also brought change. Farming techniques improved. Cities grew. Trade expanded. Christianity slowly began to spread, especially in the later years of the empire. For a long time, Hispania was considered one of the most important regions of the Roman world. But even the strongest empires don't last forever. Rome's grip would eventually loosen. The next chapter of Spain's history was already on its way, but for now, Rome's shadow loomed large. Hispania was no longer just a far-off peninsula. It was part of something bigger. And it had the scars, and roads, to prove it. Rome had poured its soul into the Iberian Peninsula, roads, cities, temples, aqueducts, but empires don't last forever. By the late 4th century, something began to shift. Cracks spread across the Roman world like fractures in ancient stone. The legions were thinning, the economy wobbling, and the edges of the empire, places like Hispania, grew increasingly hard to hold. The Visigoths, once Rome's allies and occasional enemies, saw the weakness and moved in. They weren't invaders in the traditional sense. In the beginning, they were refugees, pushed westward by the Huns. But with Rome losing its grip, the Visigoths walked into Hispania not as guests, but as new landlords. They didn't burn the cities or tear down the aqueducts. In many ways, they wanted what Rome had, a functioning society, prestige, order. But this was no longer Rome. It was the beginning of something else. In the 5th century, the Western Roman Empire officially fell, and the Visigoths took the opportunity to build something new from the old ruins. They established their own kingdom, with Toledo as its heart. But it was a kingdom constantly trying to define itself. They adopted Christianity, though it took decades to fully align with the Catholicism of the Roman Church. At first, they clung to Arian Christianity, a version considered heretical by Rome, creating tension with the Hispano-Roman majority. Culturally, they were hybrids. The Visigoths spoke their own Germanic tongue but slowly absorbed Latin, blending their traditions with Roman law and administration. They wore Roman clothes, ruled from Roman villas, and governed using Roman ideas, but the empire they built lacked Rome's unity. Power rested in the hands of fragile kings, many of whom came and went in quick succession, some poisoned, others overthrown. The nobility was divided, often driven by personal ambition rather than loyalty. This constant power struggle made the kingdom vulnerable. When one king fell, another noble rose to claim the throne, sparking internal rifts. Some kings tried to centralize power, others leaned on the church to legitimize their rule. There was brilliance, such as the Council of Toledo, which shaped Spain's legal and religious foundations, but it was often overshadowed by instability. The memory of Rome lingered, but this new kingdom often felt like it was tiptoeing across ice. Still, the Visigoths managed to maintain control of the peninsula for over 2 centuries. They built churches, preserved Roman learning, and kept the idea of a unified Iberia alive, if only just. But the cracks kept widening, and as the 7th century drew to a close, no one knew how close they were to the edge of an entirely new era. In 711, the tide turned. A new power from the south crossed the Strait of Gibraltar, and everything changed. The Moors, Muslim forces from North Africa, swept through the peninsula with stunning speed. Within a few years, the Visigothic kingdom had collapsed. It wasn't just a conquest, it was a transformation. They called it Al-Andalus. At its height, it wasn't just a Muslim territory, it was one of the most advanced societies in the world. Córdoba, its capital, boasted streetlights, libraries, paved roads, and running water while much of Europe still stumbled through the Dark Ages. Scholars, poets, and architects turned the cities of Al-Andalus into centers of brilliance. Medicine, mathematics, philosophy, and astronomy thrived, influenced by a blend of Islamic, Jewish, and Christian thought. Mosques stood beside churches. Markets buzzed with the sounds of Arabic, Latin, Hebrew, and Berber. And while tensions between faiths did exist, there were long periods of coexistence. Jews held high positions. Christians, called Mozarabs, adopted Arabic customs while maintaining their faith. It was a world built on contradictions, devotion and science, conquest and tolerance, strict faith and intellectual freedom. The architecture told its own story. The Great Mosque of Córdoba, with its endless arches and intricate details, didn't just symbolize religious devotion, it was a testament to what the Moors had brought. Gardens were designed as reflections of paradise. Palaces glowed with geometric patterns and poetry carved into stone. But this golden era was not without cracks. Rivalries between Muslim factions, rebellions from Christian kingdoms in the north, and divisions within the ruling elite began to eat away at the unity of Al-Andalus. It was brilliant, but it wasn't invincible. The Christian kingdoms in the north, small, scrappy, and often overshadowed, saw opportunity in the chaos. Over the next several centuries, they launched what would become known as the Reconquista, a long, uneven, often brutal effort to reclaim Iberia. It wasn't a straight line. Sometimes the Christian kingdoms fought each other more fiercely than they fought the Moors. At other times, Muslims allied with Christians against rival Muslim factions. But slowly, city by city, region by region, the Christian frontier crept south. Castile and Aragon rose as the dominant Christian powers. They were not just kingdoms, they were engines of ambition. As the centuries wore on, their leaders grew more organized, their armies more disciplined. The marriage of Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile in 1469 united the two most powerful Christian realms. It wasn't just a love story, it was a political revolution. By 1492, only Granada remained under Muslim rule. Surrounded, weakened, and diplomatically cornered, it fell to the Catholic monarchs. The moment was symbolic, the end of 8 centuries of Muslim presence and the beginning of something new. That same year, Columbus set sail, backed by the very monarchs who had taken Granada. Spain wasn't just a reunited kingdom now. It was ready to become an empire. The Reconquista had lasted nearly 800 years, a marathon of war and faith. It left scars, legends, and a Spain forever shaped by the fusion and friction of 3 great religions. But more than anything, it forged a new identity. A nation born of conquest, survival, and ambition, standing at the edge of a new world. In the year 1492, the Spanish Empire was about to embark on a journey that would forever alter the course of history. Christopher Columbus, driven by the ambition of finding a new route to Asia, set sail from the shores of Castile, not knowing that he was about to open a new world. Spain, unified under Ferdinand and Isabella, was now poised to extend its reach beyond the coasts of Europe, with the world's oceans serving as the new frontiers. In a matter of decades, Spain's empire stretched across vast parts of the Americas, from the Caribbean to the Andean Mountains and beyond. Spain's wealth exploded with the discovery of silver and gold, which flooded into the kingdom, making it one of the richest, most powerful nations in Europe. But with power comes a steep price. The greed for riches brought out the darker side of the Spanish Empire. Indigenous peoples were enslaved, kingdoms were razed, and cultures shattered, all in the name of progress, glory, and God. Yet, for Spain, the era wasn't just about conquest and extraction. This was the golden age of Spanish culture. It was an era that gave the world masterpieces in art, literature, and architecture. The mighty empire was also a patron of scholars and explorers, with inquisitive minds like those of Galileo and Columbus, who chart new territories in both the natural world and the intellectual one. But beneath the splendor of gold and the glow of candles and royal courts, the empire began to fracture. Internal strife grew, and the once united kingdom struggled to maintain its hold on an increasingly scattered empire. Spain's power, while dominant, was not without its cracks. The empire's size began to drain its resources, and its global commitments strain its once unbeatable military. The tide that once carried Spain to the forefront of global affairs now threatens to pull it under. It was a precarious balance. One that, while rooted in centuries of glory, was on the verge of collapse. The empire had stretched its arms too far, and the world Spain had conquered began to slip from her grasp. By the 17th century, Spain found itself battling internal wars, royal disputes, and revolts across its vast empire. The loss of colonies, such as the Dutch Rebellion and the eventual loss of the Spanish Armada in 1588, marked the beginning of a slow but steady decline. The dream of Spain as the eternal empire started to fade. The monarchy's grip weakens. Throughout the 18th and 19th centuries, Spain struggled to maintain its position in Europe. The winds of change were blowing, and they weren't in Spain's favor. Napoleon's rise to power in France and his subsequent invasion of Spain in the early 1800s marked a turning point in the nation's history. The Napoleonic Wars swept across Europe, and Spain, like much of the continent, became a battleground. Napoleon's forces invaded Spain, overthrowing the monarchy and placed his brother, Joseph Bonaparte, on the Spanish throne. This sparked the Peninsular War, a bloody conflict that dragged on for years, with Spain fighting not only against the French but also internal factions. It was during this time that the seeds of modern Spanish identity were sown, as resistance fighters like the guerrilleros stood firm against foreign occupation. However, this is not just a time of military turmoil. With the fall of Napoleon and the return of Spanish monarchy in the early 19th century, Spain entered a period of civil wars and upheaval. The Carlist Wars, battles for the throne between rival factions, tear apart the fabric of Spain's political system, and Spain's colonies in Latin America begin to demand independence. By the mid-1800s, Spain had lost most of its colonies. Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines were the last to fall in 1898, marking the end of the Spanish Empire and its days as a global superpower. It was a humiliating defeat, one that left Spain grappling with its place in the world. The wounds from the loss of the empire are deep, and for decades, Spain lingers in a state of political and social turmoil. The early 20th century didn't offer much respite either. Spain's involvement in World War I is limited, but its internal strife continues. The Spanish Civil War, 1936 to 1939, a brutal conflict between the Republicans and Nationalists, is one of the most defining moments in Spain's modern history. The war tore the country apart, pitting families against each other in a bloody battle for ideological control. When Francisco Franco, the nationalist leader, emerged victorious, Spain entered a dark era of dictatorship. Under Franco, Spain became a nation of silence and fear. Free speech was stifled, political dissidents were imprisoned, and the country was isolated from the rest of Europe. Franco's regime, marked by authoritarian rule and censorship, stood as a monument to the price of stability at the expense of freedom. Spain enters a period of repression, unable to move forward or back, stuck in a state of waiting. It wasn't until Franco's death in 1975 that Spain began its long walk back toward democracy. The transition, led by King Juan Carlos I, is remarkable for its peaceful nature. The country, scarred by years of oppression, begins to embrace the values of democracy, civil liberties, and human rights, opening a new chapter in its history. Spain in the 21st century is a country that reflects its complex and multifaceted history. It's a nation of many voices, many cultures, and many identities. The Basque Country and Catalonia, with their distinct languages and customs, challenge the notion of a single Spanish identity. Political and cultural tensions occasionally flare up between these regions and the central government, as questions of independence and autonomy remain alive in the national conversation. Despite these tensions, Spain is, at heart, a place where tradition and modernity coexist in harmony. Flamenco music, the passionate, fiery dance that has become one of Spain's most iconic symbols, echoes through the narrow streets of Seville. In Barcelona, Gaudi's Sagrada Familia rises in defiance of time, a work of art that continues to shape the city's skyline. Soccer, football, is more than just a sport here, it's an obsession. The fierce rivalry between Real Madrid and Barcelona is a testament to the passionate spirit of the nation. Culturally, Spain continues to embrace its diversity. From its arts to its cuisine, the country's deep-rooted history of conquest, trade, and immigration has left it with a wealth of influences. Spanish food, from tapas to paella, tells the story of centuries of cultural exchange. The influence of the Moors is still evident in the arches of Granada's Alhambra and the scent of spices in Spanish kitchens. The legacy of the Reconquista is present in the faces of people from different regions and backgrounds, who all claim their place in Spain's story. Politically, Spain is a strong member of the European Union, contributing to the broader fabric of European identity. It has moved far from the days of isolation under Franco, and today, it plays an integral role in shaping the future of the continent. Spain's history is a mosaic, a collection of vibrant and sometimes contradictory pieces that come together to form a picture of a country that has survived wars, empires, revolutions, and dictatorship, and yet still stands proudly on the world stage. But with its rich history and vibrant culture, what will the next chapter hold for a nation that has continually reinvented itself? Well, maybe only time will reveal the answers. Or what do you think? Kindly share your thoughts with us in the comments below. And don't forget to like, share and subscribe for more informative contents like this. See you in the next video.